Zog the Heilige Gemara. Amar Mar. Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon said that the only karbanos that you were able to be makriv in the Mishkan in Gilgal was karbanos chayva of tzibur that are kavur lahem zman. So they have to be pre-scheduled karbanos that are karbanos of chayv. That's number one. And he also has a korban pesach, which technically is also a korban tzibur of chayv that has a kaviyas of zman. So Amar Mar, Reb Shimon Omer, my time Reb Shimon. What is this for, Reb Shimon? The Chsivit says when Klal Yisrael crossed over the Yarden, it says Vayasu b'nei Yisrael Pesach b'Gilgal. Now it doesn't mamish say that. What it says is Vayachanu b'nei Yisrael b'Gilgal Vayasu Pesach b'Arba'os Yom L'Chodesh. So the question is, why did the Torah need to tell us that they brought the korban Pesach? Why wouldn't they bring the korban Pesach? Did the Torah say they davened that morning? Did the Torah say they put on tefillin that morning? So why does the Torah need to tell us that they brought the korban Pesach? Why would I think otherwise? Shita. Ella hakamash malon. The reason why the Torah tells us that they brought the korban Pesach is to teach us what type of karbanos they were allowed to bring in Gilgal. Ella hakamash malon the chayvos kein Pesach hu dekar. You know what type of chayvos that they're allowed to bring in the Mishkan in Gilgal? Chayvos that are similar to the korban Pesach, which means they're pre-scheduled. Halav ken Pesach loy karet. So, for instance, a par halam dava shel tzibur, although that is a korban of the tzibur, nevertheless, since it's not a pre-scheduled, it only is brought if there's a chet that was done. That is not covered. That is not covered. That's not a korban that you could bring in the Mishkan in Gilgal. The what about the Tanoim who hold that you could bring all korbanos of tzibur in Gilgal? What does he do with the fact that the Torah mentions dafka the korban Pesach? We learn from here that even though somebody is an oral, for some reason he can't have a bris, and he becomes Tomei Tumas Meis, he could still receive the zrika of the Mei Paraduma to be Matarim. How in the world do you see that from the fact that Klal Yisrael was mocked to the korban Pesach when they got into Eretz Yisrael? Zokt Rashi, very simple. It's a very simple cheshbon. The assumption is that everyone that came in to Eretz Yisrael were Tamei Mason, from the Mason that died throughout their time in the Midbar. It's also assumed, because the pasuk tells us that nobody had bris in the Midbar since there was no Ruach Tzophonis. It was dangerous to get a bris. So everybody arrived on the 10th of Nisan into Eretz Yisrael, because that's when they crossed the Yarden. On the 10th of Nisan, they all arrived into Eretz Yisrael. They were Tamei Mace, and they were also Arel. So let's think about this. They would need, normally, Tamei Mace, on day 3 and on day 7, he needs his Rika. So the day they come into Eretz Yisrael, they can technically get his Rika. So they came in on the 10th, they can get their Rika on the 11th. And now the question is, why didn't they do the Rika in the Midbar? So the question is, in the Midbar, they were Arelim, right? So if an oral cannot get Zrika, then what would they have to do? They'd have to come into Israel on the 10th, and they'd have to get a bris right away on the 11th, and get the Zrika done. So Zrika number 1 would be on the 11th, and then they have to count 4 days to get the next Zrika, 12, 13, 14, 15. Which means their second Zrika, where they became Tahar from Tumas Meis, would have been on the first day Pesach. Way too late to bring the korban Pesach. So it must be that they already had the Zrika of the Paraduma before they came into Eretz Yisrael, while they were still Arelim. So you have a right that the Zrika of the Paraduma works, even if somebody's an oral. That's why the Torah tells us that they brought the korban Pesach. Tani Tana Kameder of Ada Bar Abba. A Tana quoted the following halacha. Namboira quoted the following brisa in front of Rabbi Abraham. Ein bein Bama Gedoyla LeBama Ketana. The only difference between the Bama Gedoyla and the Bama Ketana, so the Mishkan and Gilgal, and the personal Bama that people had, Ela Pesach v'Chayvos HaKavul LaMzman. This sounds just like Reb Shimon, And if we go into the Shita Mikubetzes, he actually adds those words as follows: the Amalach Mani, who is the Tana of this Brisa, Rab Shimoni, the Amar Ein Bein Bama Gedoyla, Le Bama Ketano, El Pesach, the Chayvay Sakavu Alahem Zman. Freit the Gemara, maybe a Chatos that's Kavu Alahem Zman, you shouldn't be able to bring. Why? Because Titargim Mas Nisach, the Oilas Chayva, the Ika Oilas Nadava, because there is an Oilas Nadava. The Chatos, Rashi amends the words here. The Ichatos, looking at Rashi, Chatos Nadava Mi'ika, there is no Chatos Nadava. So what the Gemara is asking, maybe this Brisa that says Pesach and Chayvus are Kavulam Zman, maybe it's only referring to Oilos that are Kavulam Zman, because Kinegdon, you have Oilos of Nadava that you could be Makriv on a Bama. But who said like a Chatos? Who said that you would be able to be Makriv in the Beis HaMikdash? Maybe not, because you couldn't, a Yochid can't be Makriv a Chatos on the Bama. Question is, what does this have to do with anything? Why would you say that? The Teretz is, Dr. Rashi, if you look at this Brisa and the wording of Reb Shimon, what does he say? Ein bein Bama Gedol Bama Ketana, Ela Pesach b'Chayvus HaGavul Lemzman. The question is, why in the world does the Brisa itemize Pesach? All the Brisa should have said was Ein bein Bama Gedola LeBama Ketana, Ela Chayvus HaGavul Lemzman. And that means anything that has a designated Zman, like the Oila and the Chatos of Rosh Chodesh, you can all bring. Or Pesach you can bring. Why did the Tana see a need to itemize Pesach? Zokt Rashi, it must be that there's two categories of karbonos we're talking about. One category of karbonos we're talking about are the karbonos that you could never bring b'nedava, like a chatos. On that, the Brisa says, any carbon that you could not bring b'nedava, which means you could never bring it on the Bama Ketana, you cannot bring at all in Gilgal. The only carbon that you cannot bring as a Nedava, that we do allow you to bring on the Bama Gedola of the Mishkan and Gilgal was the Pesach. That's from the category of karbonos that are not Baba Nedava. What about the category of karbonos that are Baba Nedava, such as the Oila, the Chayvay Sakavu Lemzman? The only type of oilers that you could bring in the Mishkan in Gilgal were Kavul Lemzman, like the Karbonos of Rosh Chodesh and the Carbon Tomid. Those were all oilers, but not the Chatois. Zok the Gemara, Velukma ben Minchas Chayva. Why don't we also say by a Mincha? We know a Mincha could be brought for the Dava, so therefore maybe the Minchas Chayva that's Kavul Lemzman, like the Chavitin, maybe that should also be able to be brought in Gilgal. The Chavitin, which is mandatory and it's Kavul Lemzman. The reason why we don't include Menachos is because Sover ain't Menachos Babama. This could be going according to the Mandamar that we had yesterday, that there are no such thing. You never bring a Mincha in the Bama, because the Pasuk says Dafke Zevichos, Dafke Zevachim, things that you shacht like animals, but not a Mincha. Gewaltig. The Mishnah says that when they came to Shiloh, the Mishkan Shiloh had a very interesting construction. Although the walls were made out of stone, the roof was made out of urios. So we could call it part bias, part oil. Zok Gemara, we know how does the Tana know that this is what the construction of the Mishkan Shiloh was like? The Pasuk says in Yeshua, I believe, in Shmuel. The Pasuk says in Shmuel, this is talking about Shmuel's mother brought him to give him over to Eli HaKohen to serve in the Mishkan. Beis Hashem Shiloh. And what is the Mishkan Shiloh referred to here as Beis Hashem, as a house that's brick and mortar. But the the other pasuk says in Tehillim, Vayitosh es Mishkan Shiloh, Hashem threw away Mishkan Shiloh when Klal Yisrael did Averis. Oil shochein ba'adam. So what is Mishkan Shiloh referred to? An oil. Another place. Again, you see that the Mishkan was referred to as an oil. So is it a bias or is it an oil? Haketzad lehaisa sham tikra. There was no hard plastered roof. El avana milamata. The walls were made out of stone. V'yiriyos milamala, but the roof was made out of the yiriyos. The hiyos menucha. That is what the pasuk referred to when the pasuk said kilevasem el menucha v'lanachla. Menucha is referring to Mishkan Shiloh. As an aside, it's important that we point out the Mishkan Shiloh was referred to as Ohel Yosef Shevet Ephraim. The reason for that is because in fact Mishkan Shiloh was in the Shevet, was in the Chelek of the land that belonged to Ephraim. Zok Tehele Gemara. Kochi Kochim, the halacha was by the Mishkan Shiloh, you can eat Kadashim Kalam B'chol Roya. Anywhere, no matter how far away it was from Mishkan Shiloh, if you were able to see Mishkan Shiloh from that spot, you would be allowed to eat Kadashim Kalam. Minanamili, how do we know this halacha? Amar Boishia, we have multiple Tanoim who offer multiple Meroim who offer multiple rayas to know this halacha. So Amar Boishia, he says the Amar Kra, Hishamer Lecha, and this is referring to Shiloh. Hishamer Lecha, because it's talking about Elamanucha. Hishamer Lecha, Pentala Oiloisecha, Bechol Mokoim Asher Tire. So don't be makriv your karbanos within sight of the Mishkan. So we're medayik. Bechol Mokoim Asher Tire, Iatamayla. You're not allowed to be makriv the carbon on the Mizbeach if you're only within sight, but not within the perimeter of the Azara. But to eat the carbon, to eat the meat of a kadashim kalam, like to eat the meat of a shlomim, there you can eat the meat as far away as you are from the Mishkan Shiloh, as long as you could see it. Frankly, Gemara, who said that's what the diik you should make is? You can't be makrivit. Maybe we could be medayik from here that you could even shech the carbon out of the Azara anywhere within sight of Mishkan Shiloh. Amar B'Yamai, Amar Kra, Sham Tala v'Sham Tasa. It says Sham Tala in the base of Mikdash itself, in the Mishkan itself, is where you should make the halah, referring to that krava. V'Sham Tasa, all the other asiyos, all of the necessary steps that are done in the preparation of a carbon, all have to be done within the walls of the Azara itself. The only thing that we would allow further out within eyesight within line of sight of the Mishkan Shiloh was the Achila. That's pshat number one. Pshat number two. Rav Avdima Bechasa Amar Ka, it says in the pasuk, referring to Mishkan Shiloh, it's talking about the borders of Eretz Yisrael. The Torah tells us the Yotza Gvul Hayama, the southern border, Hamachmachta Mitzofay, V'Nasav Agvul Mizrachan, and the eastern border is Tanash Shiloh. What is Tanash Shiloh? Mokoim Shakol Roya Oisai. Tanash Shiloh means the place that whoever sees this place, a place that's within eyesight, within line of sight of Shiloh, Shakol Roya Oisai Misanich Alav Alachilas Kochim Shiloh. Anybody who will see this site in the future will krecht oi. I remember when we were able to eat kochim in this spot because it was within a line of sight of Mishkan Shiloh. So from the fact that the Torah describes the borders of Eretz Yisrael using this expression that there's a place where people see Shiloh, and they krecht oi, we used to be able to eat kochim here. That tells us that Achilas Kochim by Shiloh was within the eyesight. Rabavo Amar, a different raya. Amar Kra, this is by the brachas given to Yosef. It says, Ben Paris Yosef, Ben Paris Ali Oyin. We just learned this last week in Vayechi, and we darshan Paris means Miloshim Pruravu. Yosef was zoiche to expand his chusim and to be able to have a mishkan in his chelik, the Mishkan Shiloh, that you were able to eat kachim anywhere within line of sight of it. Why was he zoiche to it? Ben Paris Yosef, Ben Paris Ali Ayin, Ayin Shaloi Rotetza Lozun V'Lehanois midavar sheinish shaloi, his eye that he controlled and he didn't want to be nehenna from Eishes Potifar, which wasn't his, that eye was being pious. Tiske v'toichel kamola. It'll create such growth. Nisrabaloik, achilas kochim, makam achilas kochim nisrabaloi aydei ayin. Through the schus of his eye, he was zoichet to have growth by allowing the kochim of his mishkan, the mishkan that's in his chelik, to be eaten with a full line of sight. So once again, you see that the kachim of Mishkan Shilai was able to be eaten in the line of sight. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina Amar, it says in the brachas of Yosef in Zois HaBracha, it says a ritzoin shoich nisneh. What does it mean, a ritzoin shoich nisneh? Ayin shaloi rotzah lehanois medavar shein shaloi. Rotzoin, the rotzoin that Yosef had control over and didn't allow his eye to have a noah from Eishes Potifar, his mishkan, you'll be able to eat the kachim from his mishkan, even if you're not in the chelik of Yosef, even if you're far away in the chelik of one of his brothers, who we are referring to as Sanuin, as enemies, because they sold him. Even in their chelik, you'll be able to eat from the kachim of Yosef's mishkan, the mishkan shiloi, as long as you're within the line of sight. So Ritzayin, the Ritzayin that Yosef controlled not to look at what he shouldn't, Shoich Nisneh allows people who are even living by the Sainim, by the Sneh, referring to Sainim, they can eat kachim if they're within the line of sight of the Mishkan Shiloh. Tana, we learned, when we say when you're within the line of sight of the Mishkan Shiloh, you were able to eat kachim, it means Roya Kuloi, Veloy Hamapsik, Beinoi Leveinoi. So let's see the right girsa on this. So if we look in the Aleph in the Shita Mukabetzes, Kol Shahu Roya Be'ein Dover Mafsik Beinoi Leveinoi means as long as you could see it and there's no obstruction, as long as there's a clear line of sight and there's no obstruction, that's called Roya. Let me give you an example. Like the Beis Medrash of Ma'in, which had a clear line of sight. So what does this mean? The Mefarshim tell us there's a very famous Beis Medrash of Ma'in where Rabbi Yochanan and other Gedolim hung out. And it was actually near Tveria. Now, Shiloi is very far from that. There's no way you could see Shiloi from Ma'in. It's way too far. Shiloi is somewhat northwest of Yerushalayim. That's where Shiloi is. It's more in the central part of Eretz Yisrael, nowhere near Tveria, which is where Ma'in was. So there are those who learn that when he said Azbulach B'Knisha D'Moin, it means just like from the basic Knesset of Ma'in, there's a clear line of sight to the city of Tveria. That's what I mean by a clear line of sight. But it doesn't mean that from Ma'in you were able to see the Mishkan Shiloh. Now it's a known fact that when they built the original Belz of Beis Medrash in the city of Belz in Europe, Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, the Rebbe said that you can draw a straight line from our Beis Medrash here in Belz in Europe straight to the Makam HaMikdash, and that line will not go through any churches, any Talmudic Gezach. So when they built the Belz of Beis Medrash in Yerushalayim, they also wanted to have that same feature. But instead of using Ruach HaKodesh, they used satellite pictures. And at least somewhere on the roof, if you stand on the roof of the Belz of Beis Medrash, there'll be a straight line of sight to the Makam HaMikdash without any churches obstructing it. Okay, so to Gemara weiter. You don't necessarily have to be able to see the entire Mishkan Shiloi, as long as you could see some part of Mishkan Shiloi from whichever location you're in, you'll be able to eat kachim. Boira Papa, what about if you're standing in a certain place, you're high enough for Roya, you'll see Gilgal. I'm sorry, you'll see Shiloi. But Yosef, if you're sitting down, now you're not so high anymore. Ve'ena Roya, my. Do you say you go busser the spot that geographic point? At that point, it is visible, if you're tall enough, or do you say it has to actually be visible to you at that point? But Rabbi Yirmiyah, what about if you're in a valley? And if you were 100 feet higher than the floor of the valley, you'd be able to see. But now that you're at the bottom of the valley, you can't. Again, but my take. Do you look at the location if technically there'll be a straight line of sight, or do you actually have to see the Mishkan Shiloi from the position that you're in to be able to eat from the Kachim column? The Gemara ends up with a take. Kiyasher Avdimi Amar Rabbi, B'shloishim Mekoymos, Sharsa Shchina Al Yisrael. In 3 places there was a Shras HaShchina in Klal Yisrael. B'Shiloi, by Mishkan Shiloi, by V'noi V'Givoin, which the Gemara is counting as 1, and Ubeis Halaman by the Beis HaMikdash. Now, I'm not sure why there was not considered that there was a Shras HaShchina by the Mishkan in the Midbar, or why it wasn't considered that there was a Shras HaShchina by the Mishkan in Gilgal. I don't know the answer, but we're talking about this certain level of a Shras HaShchina that only existed in Shiloi, Noi V'Givain, and Beis Elam. Uvechulon, Uvechulon, Loi Sharsa, Elo B'chelik Binyamin. In each of these 3 cases, where was this Beis HaMikdash, Mishkan, located? It was always in the Chelik of Binyamin. Shenemar says, Koyvev Alav Kalayoim. The Shechina hovers over Binyamin all the time. Kol Chafivos, all of the hovering, all of the Ashras HaShechina, Lo Yehu Elo B'chelk Lo Shal Binyamin. They'll always be in the Chelik of Binyamin. Kiyazal Abaye said, heard this beautiful word, and he decided to say it over to his Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef. Amar Kamed Rabbi Yosef. Amar Rabbi Yosef commented, Chad B'ra Havalei L'chaylo. Chaylo, my friend, only has 1 son, referring to Abaye, because Chaylo was the father of Abaye. V'loi Miskin, and his son Toignisht. Abaye Toignisht, because what he's saying is false. Why? Because Vaksivin says in the Pasuk, Vayitosh es Mishkan Shiloi, we just saw Nomad Aleph. It says Vayitosh es Mishkan Shiloi, Chsiv, Vayimas Ba'oil Yosef Ubeshever, Ephraim Lebochar. So we see clearly from the Pasuk that Mishkan Shiloi was not in the Chelik of Binyamin, rather it was in the Chelik of Yosef. So that's why Abaye is saying something that's not correct. Amar Avada, my kashale. I don't understand why Rabbi Yosef found difficulty in the halacha that Abaye quoted. Dilma Shchina bechelik Binyamin. Maybe the actual Shchina, the actual Mishkan was in Chelik Binyamin. But what does it mean that Hashem pulled it out of Yosef? V'Sanhedrin Gedola bechelik Yosef. You find the Sanhedrin is always sitting right near the Makam and Mikdash. So the Makam and Mikdash was taka in Chelik Binyamin. But the Sanhedrin was in the Chelik of Yosef. And this is not such a weird concept. That's how it was in the Beis HaMikdash. V'Demotzinu b'Beis Elamim, the Shechina bechelka shel Binyamin, v'Sanhedrin bechelik Yehuda. So you see, you can have 2 zones that are side by side. So maybe that's how it was by the Mishkan in Shiloi. Yosef could have been side by side with Binyamin. So Rabbi Yosef said, no, that doesn't make sense. Hashda, Hasa Mikra v'Nachlos, Kabe Adoni. Yehuda and Binyamin were neighboring Nachlos. So there was some overlap over there where you could have one side in Yehuda's Chelik, one side of Binyamin's. But Hacha, when we're talking about Mishkan, Shiloi, Mi Mekarvin, were they close? Now it happens to be that the Chelik of Binyamin did border the Chelik of Ephraim. But the Mefarshim speak out that where Shiloi was, it wasn't near the border. Hachanami Mekarvin. Zok Gemara, no, maybe they were close. Why were they close? Lamaisa, we're saying that the Mishkan in Binyamin was far away from the border between Binyamin and Yosef. True, but what did we know happened in the Beis HaMikdash itself? Kedoma Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, Ritzua Haisa Yotzas Mechelko Shel Yehuda, V'nechnesas Lechelko Shel Binyamin. We learned that there was one strip of land that encroached onto Binyamin's Chelik from Yehuda's Chelik. Uva Haya Mizbeach Bani, and it was on that little section that the Mizbeach was built, on Yehuda's little section. So it wasn't a straight border. There was like a peninsula, if you can call it, that stuck in to Binyamin's Chelik. And it bothered Binyamin that he didn't have full control over the Kedusha and his Rishus, and it always bothered him. He wished he could swallow up that chelik, that it should be part of Binyamin. So if that's how it was by the Beis Hamikdash, maybe we could say there was a similar scenario between Yosef and Binyamin by Mishkan Shilai. Hachanami Ritzu to Yosef Mechelko Shel Yosef Lechelko Shel Binyamin. V'Hani Dechsev, and maybe that's shot in the pasuk that we saw all the way on top to Anna Shilai. So at the beginning, we were Ta'ala means whoever saw that area with krechts that we used to be able to eat kachemir, now we can't. Maybe what Tana Shila means the krechts is because Binyamin was krechting that Yosef had this chelik and he wanted that to all be part of his chelik. He wanted to be the complete host of the Shechina. Kitanoi, there's a machlokes if all of the Mishkan, all of the Shrosh Shechina was in the chelik of Binyamin. Chayfei Olav Zamikdash Rishon, Kol Hayoim Zamikdash Sheni, Uvein Kisei V'Shachin Elu Yemoshe Mashiach. Clearly agreeing with the Shita that all the Bata Mikdashos were in the chelik of Binyamin. But Rabbi Yomer no, Chayfei Olav is the Eilam Hazeh, Kol Hayoim Elu Yemoshe Mashiach, Uvein Kisei V'Shachin is the Eilam Haba. So it could be it's not referring to the Makam Mikdash; it's just referring to in general that there was Hashrosh Shechina on Shevet Binyamin. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. Oh, I'm wrong. He explains what I said very vividly. He said, according to Rebbe, that it's Olam Hazeh and Yemoshe Mashiach, that says that wherever there was Shechina b'Olam Hazeh, it was in Chelik Binyamin, in all places. But according to the first shot, it was only in the Beis Hamikdash, not necessarily everywhere in Olam Hazeh where there was Hashrosh Shechina. So it's the second shita that would hold that whenever there was Hashrosh Shechina by Klal Yisrael, even in the Mishkans, it was by Yosy, it was by Binyamin. The first shot, it's only in the Beis Hamikdash. Taner Rabban. Yimei Oyel Moed. Now we're going to learn a very mathematical Gemara, so we have to have cheshbon. If anybody has a calculator, it would help. Taner Rabban. Yimei Oyel Moed shebamidbar arba'im shana. How long did the Mishkan last in the Midbar? It was arba'im shana chasar achas. It was 39 years, because we know that they were in the Midbar for 40 years, and we know that the Mishkan was built on the second year. So let's start with let's start with 39. Okay, and then let's add to it. Yimei Oyel Moed shebegilgal was arba asar zayin shekifsu v'zayin shechilku. So that tells us 39 plus 14 is 53. Okay, then Yimei Oyel Moed shebenoi v'givayin. The amount of time that the Oyel Moed lasted in Noiv and Givon, which is right after Gilgal, was Chamishim V'Sheva, which is 57, plus 57, that's 110 years. Now we also know that 440 years, 480 years after they left Mitzrayim, 480 years after they left Mitzrayim, is when the Beis Hamikdash was built. So Kum Techois, 440 minus 110 is 330. I'm not sure if my cheshbon is good. So Nishtaru, how much time was left? Gimel Meis v'shivim choser achas. It was. Oh, I'm sorry. It's 480. So it's 480 minus 110 is 370. But I counted 40 years, it's really 39 years. So it works out to exactly, if you add up all the years from when they went into Eretz Yisrael till when the Beis Hamikdash was built was 440. If you deduct from it the 14 and the 57, so let's do it again. 440 minus 14 minus 57 works out to 369. So I'm not going to focus on the 40 years in the Midbar. Let's just start from when they got into Eretz Yisrael. It was 440 years till the Beis Hamikdash was built. There's 14 years of Gilgal. There was 57 years of Noi V'Givain, so the remaining 369 years was Mishkan Shiloi. So in fact, Mishkan Shiloi lasted a very long time. Okay, now all of the numbers that we just presented, we're now going to prove. Yimei Oyel Moiche B'Midbar, the amount of years that the Mishkan lasted in the Midbar was Arborim Chotzer Achas, was 39 years. Minolan, how do you know? The Amar Mar, Shana Rishayna Asa Moshe Esa Mishkan. Moshe built the Mishkan during the first year, and it was inaugurated in the second year. Shnia Hukam Mishkan. Vishalach Moshe Meraglim, and we'll see how that's relevant in a second. So I'll call upon them, out of the 40 years that they were in the Midbar, 39 of them, they had the Mishkan. Now, the next number that was offered to us was Sheba Gilgal Arba Esrei Sheva Shekivshu V'Sheva Shechilku. We know there was 14 years when the Mishkan crossed over the Yarden into Eretz Yisrael. It was in place for 14 years. How do I know? Also, an interesting calculation. The Karmar Kalev, after 7 years after they got into Eretz Yisrael, was when they finished capturing it, and now they're about to start splitting up the land. So Kalev made an appeal that he was entitled to a special chelik because of his hard work when he was going with the Meraglim that Moshe sent out. So the Gomer Kalev, ben Arboim Shana Anoichi Bishloach Moshe Ever Hashem Oisi Mikadosh Bernea L'Ragel Esaretz V'Ashiv Oisei Davar Kasherim Levavi. You know how old I was when I was sent to be one of the Meraglim? I was 40 years old. I was 40 years old, which means that the second year that they were in the Midbar, the same year that the Mishkan was set up, Kalev was 40 years old. Uksiv, and now 7 years after they moved into Eretz Yisrael, and they're about to split up the land, how old was he 7 years later? I'm 85 years old right now. Meaning, 7 years ago when we came into Eretz Yisrael, I was 78. How old was Kalev when they crossed over the Yarden? Bar Shivin V'tamni. He was 78. And what did he say? Ben Chomesh Ushmoinim Shana. I'm 85 years old now. Harei Sheva Shekivshu. Those are the 7 years that it took them to capture the land. Now let's think about it. If he was 40, the second year that they were in the Midbar, and that means when he left the Midbar, it was 38 years later, which means he was 78. So he got to Eretz Yisrael at 78, and at 85 was 7 years later. So that's how we know it took 7 years for them to conquer Eretz Yisrael. How do we know that it took 7 years to split up the land? It's a svara. I don't know what the svara is. The Gemara is saying there's a svara that if it took 7 years to capture and conquer that so long, it would take to split up. I'm not sure what the connection is. I don't know if anybody has a svara. I'd love if you shared it with me. Even the ArtScroll in note 31 says it's a logic, but I don't know what the logic is.
Yeah, I don't either.
1 second, you're talking, but I can't hear you. I'm not sure why not.
Oh, I said I don't either.
Let me check my speakers because I cannot hear you. Give me 1 second. One second. Okay, let me just test my speakers. 1 second. Why is this not working?
What I'm saying is not that
Why
important.
is this not
Yeah.
working?
Yes. Do you hear me?
I've got my speakers to look. I'm not sure why it's not working. Oh, it's 1 second. Give me 1 second. I gotta get some way to turn my speaker off. 1 second. Okay, now I can fix my audio. Give me 1 second.
No, you hear me? You hear? No, obviously not. Beryl, do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Anyway, what I'm about to say is not that significant. I mean, he's Pachkin Arim there. I have nothing to say that's so earth-shattering. Looks like Beryl is frozen in time.
Not that cold outside.
Yeah. Even Yossi is not moving. On
What?
one picture he is, and the other picture he's not.
Right. On the screen. Probably
What
reboot.
Oh,
Oh, now I see you.
oh, Beryl, there. Now you're moving. You were frozen, Beryl.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
Yeah, but I have a problem.
Oh. Yossi, do you hear us? No, he's gonna cue it.
David,
Yeah.
I don't see him at all. Yeah, see.
Yeah, I see him. He's moving, but I don't hear him. We don't hear him.
I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back in.
Okay, we'll miss you, Beryl.
Uh,
I think he has to reboot.
Needs to be reboot himself. Okay, there's the Duff. Do you hear us? We don't hear you. Okay, you hear us?
yes, I'm here now.
Not you. Yossi. Yossi, do you hear us? No.
I think he hears us and we don't hear him.
He didn't indicate that he hears us. You hear he's talking and
Yeah, I don't hear him either.
he's moving his lips. Uh,
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay.
You hear us? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Right. What I was about to say wasn't that important. Yeah.
Oh,
I was just saying, well, I don't get it either. But I have a comment to make. It's interesting that the capture of Sichon and Og, which is a huge territory, was done in a matter of days. And here it took 7 years to capture Eretz Yisrael, and it wasn't even fully captured.
that's right. They left a lot of pocket.
Yeah, when Yoshua died, there was a lot still to capture.
So the question is, what took them so long?
Yeah, and really,
That's a good.
and
That's a good question.
where did they get that it took 7 years to settle them?
Yeah, and the reason why I find that particularly interesting is because sometimes you'll have a family that amasses a lot of wealth, and it takes, let's say, 20 years to amass a lot of wealth. And then when the patriarch passes away, it could take 200 years to settle it. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure how that works exactly. Okay, so let's see what Gemara weiter. So we are up to the Sheva Shechilku. Either it's a svara, Ibai Sema. This is a very interesting cheshbon. So I'm going to simplify this cheshbon. It's a long Rashi, but it's a very simple cheshbon. The pasuk says in Yirmiyahu that 14 years after Churban Bayis was a year of Yovel. So let's calculate this for just a moment. When did they start? Let's say they started counting Yovel right away when they got into Eretz Yisrael. So there was 440 years in Eretz Yisrael, and then there was 440 years in Eretz Yisrael, and then the Beis Hamikdash lasted for 410. So what is 440 plus 410? That's 850. 850 years is divisible exactly by 50. It's 17. So, if they would have started counting the Yovelos right when they got into Eretz Yisrael, then the year of the Churban would have been a Yovel year. But in fact, the year of Yovel was 14 years later, which means the whole cycle must have started 14 years later. So that's how we know that there was 7 years of Kibush and 7 years of Chiluk, and after Chiluk was when they started counting the cycles of Yovel.
That's very logical now.
But there's one problem with that. Didn't we have a machlokes if the year 50 counts as one of the years or if it's a standalone year?
Yeah, right.
So if 50 years is one of the year, it fits in perfectly. But if it's a standalone year, this whole cheshbon falls out unless we figure out 17 times 50 with that up to with those it would only add another 17 years. So it still wouldn't work. Yeah. So if you hold the Yovel was one of the 50, then it's a perfect cheshbon. Okay. So let's see weiter. Oil Moed Shebenoy Givon was 57 years. How do you know that it was 57 years? Minolam Dechsev, very simple. Vayihika Skira is Aroino Lakim. This is when the Pelishtim captured the Oren in that battle with Shaul, where Klal Yisrael lost the Oren, and the Eli HaKoyin died that day. That Eli HaKoyin, when he heard the news, he fell backwards and he died because he hit his skull on the ground and he died. The day Eli died, Shmuel HaNovi, his malchus began. That's the day that Shiloh was destroyed, which means it would have been day one of Noiv V'Givon, A, and B is it would have also been day one of Shmuel. So Ubol Noiv. Now Kishemei Shmuel Haramasi, we know that when Shmuel died, Charva Noiv Ubol Givon. Then Noiv was Charv, and they transferred the Mishkan over to Givon. So now let's figure out the numbers. Kiryas Yarim was after the Aron was captured by the Pelishtim. It made them nothing but trouble. So they ended up sending it back, and it was kept in Kiryas Yarim. And it was in Kiryas Yarim Vayirbu Ayomim Vayu Esrim Shana for 20 years. It was in Kiryas Yarim. But you know, Kol Beis Yisrael, they were yearning Acharei Hashem. So we have now a number of 20 years. let's look at this 20-year number. Hani Esher Mishana, let's figure out where these 20 years are. Esher Shana Shemalach Shmuel Ba'atzmai. The first 20 years is starting from Eli Cohen's death, starting from the day one of Noi V'Givon, which is also day one of the Aron, and then so we have now 10 years when Shmuel was king before Klal Yisrael asked for a king. Then Klal Yisrael asked for a king, and Shmuel made Shalom to the king. V'shana Shemalach Shmuel Vishal. The 1 year that Shmuel and Shaul were working together, Shaul didn't do any Averas, everything was going well. Then Shaul did the Avera, and he let Agag stay alive, and he left the animals of Amalek stay alive. And at that point, Shmuel told Shaul, we're done. And now Shaul was king for 2 more years, but without any involvement of Shmuel. Ushtayim Shemalach Shaul by himself. So now we're 10 plus 1 plus 2. We're 13 years into David Givon. Then we have the Sheva de David. Once Shaul died, for the first 7 years of David's Malchus, he wasn't even in Yerushalayim. He still had not yet been accepted by all of Klal Yisrael. He was only Melech in Hebron. That's 7 years. So now we're at 20. I believe we're at 20 because we have 10 of Shmuel, and no, 13, we're at 23. We're at 23 because we have 10 of Shmuel, and we have 1 of Shmuel, which is 11, and another 2, which is 13, and then 7 of David is 20. So we're at 20 years. The 20 years, David finally became the Melech of all of Klal Yisrael, and he moved his Malchus and his kingdom and his palace to Yerushalayim. Now, how long was David king in total? 40 years, which means he was only king in Yerushalayim for 33 years, because the first 7 was in Hebron. And the Hebron Malach Zayin Shanim, which means that by the time of David's death, he was king for 37 years in Yerushalayim. Plus, there was the 20 years before that. Let's see. There's 33 years in Yerushalayim. 33 years in Yerushalayim, which is added to the 20 years before. So 33 plus 20 is 53. Now Shlomo Melech did not build the Beis Hamikdash the day he took over. He was king for 4 years before the Beis Hamikdash was ready. He built it in the 4th year. So Kum Techais, that's 57 years from when Eli Cohen died till when Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash was 57 years. So now that if you take 57 plus 14 away from the 440 years between when they entered Eretz Yisrael and when the Beis Hamikdash was built, the amount of years that are left over, there's 369 years left, and that was the lifespan of Mishkan Shiloi. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zeicha to finish Daf Kuf Yud Ches. Tomorrow Daf Kuf Yud Tes, and Be'ez Hashem Monday we'll finish the Masechta with Kuf Chaf, and we'll also Be'ez Hashem start the Nachas on Monday.
Shkoyach.
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 Shkoyach. Yitvach.